Okay, it's working. All right. So, as I mentioned last week, this week is a Q&A. That means you ask questions and I do my best to answer them.
For my question, I have a little problem
Okay.
because I live in my house, my book.
Okay. Well, do the best to remember what you wrote, and I'll do my best to figure out what the question might be.
I might have enough questions.
She had a question for me.
Okay.
I didn't write them either because I was.
That's okay. Fire whatever your first one is. Don't be shy.
The first one. Why can we say the name of God? Like when we see the
Yud, right?
Yod,
right.
We had to say Adonai.
Okay. So the name of God is a rather complicated topic. So let me try and break it down. Oh, is there someone there?
I don't know. Someone just went down that way.
A car or walking?
A person.
Let me just check. Make sure there's.
It was in the other side.
Oh, yep. There is another car out there.
Okay.
So we can pause for.
Kaylee told me she was coming.
I thought she was.
She has many questions.
You're right.
Yeah.
So before we get into this, little distinction. When we talk about the names of God, we have to make a distinction between English and Hebrew. There is no such thing as an English name of God. We use the word God, God, as kind of a sign pointing towards God, but it is not considered to be a name of God. Right. So right off the bat, I can't write any of the actual names of God on the board, because if I write one of the names of God, I can never erase it. But I can write English words up on the board, and the English words are just fine. Now, this gets a little confusing for some people, because I bet you have probably seen somebody write that, right? That is nonsense, right? There is no hyphen in the English word God, and the idea behind it is completely unnecessary, and it confuses what is sacred with what is not sacred. Got a little drop there. Yeah. Wonder if that's just I think it's just the air conditioning. Right.
The name is Yud-Hey.
Right. So the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey, which I can't write up on the board as that name, right? That is God's actual name. Right? I like to say, if God were signing his checks, that's what God would sign, is his personal name. Whereas the word Elohim is the word that means God, but it's more like the title God. Just like in English, the word God could be talking about the real God, or it could be talking about, Zeus. The word Elohim could be talking about the real God, or it could be talking about Zeus, or it could even be talking about powerful people in some cases.
Yes, the king, the Jews.
Exactly. Sometimes they also are referred to as Elohim, meaning powerful people. This causes a lot of confusion, but for most of our use, when we are actually using and talking about God, we have to differentiate between the real names and then substitute words, and then English approximations, things that we use in English just to get close. So G-O-D is the word that we usually use in English to talk about God, and that's perfectly fine. You'll also see sometimes people will write the Lord. The Lord is also fine, because the Lord is trying to translate the word Adonai.
Yeah, the Lord is Adonai.
Exactly. That's what Adonai basically means. And we use Adonai in Hebrew when we want to pronounce God's name without saying God's name. That's why when we say a blessing, we say Baruch Atah Adonai. Now, if you look, Yud, Hey, and Vav, Hey, they can't spell Adonai. That's the wrong letters. But that is the substitute pronunciation that we use. So that's the word. Now, when you're writing, you would never write out Yud Hey Vav Hey on a piece of paper unless you were writing a mezuzah, or unless you were writing something that was meant to be sacred, that was holy, and that you were planning to keep as such. So what do people do in English? Well, in English, you can write God, you can write Lord, you can write, the merciful one, the master of the world, many different titles you want in English, just fine. those are not actually God's name. However, if you want to write in Hebrew for God's name, but you want to write a substitute, what do people do? Well, people will do a hey with a little quote after it, and that stands for Hashem. Hashem is the Hebrew word that means the name. So it's kind of like, on the forms where it says insert name here, right? It's the literally saying the name because I can't pronounce God's actual name. So we're just using the word name instead of saying God's name. Does that make sense?
Why is that you cannot pronounce his name in Hebrew?
Okay, so why the name? The Yud, the Hey, the Vav, and the Hey, why is that name considered unpronounceable in Hebrew? Well, it's considered unpronounceable, not because it's too hard to say. It's not a tongue twister, but the actual pronunciation is considered to be so powerful of a connection with.
Too holy.
It's not just holy, but it has meaning in and of itself that we do not use correctly. It's giving somebody the name of God and letting them say it is like giving everybody their own personal nuclear bomb, right? That's just not good because people will use it in bad ways. Think about how people just use the English word God, right? Can you imagine if they weren't just using the removed word for God, but were using God's real name? I mean, they would be using it everywhere. And they would be using it in horrible and wrong situations. In fact, we see an example of that in the Torah, where there is a man who curses someone else using God's name, and it is a huge catastrophe for the community. And over time, they slowly began to restrict so that fewer people would use God's name, until eventually the official correct pronunciation is no longer considered general knowledge. We have very good ideas of what it probably is, but mispronouncing God's name is even worse. So we just leave the actual pronunciation off the table, and instead we use either the English or the Hebrew words Adonai, Elohim, El Shaddai, the many different references to God in Hebrew, or we can use English words just as well.
Or Spanish.
Oh, of course, or Spanish, or Portuguese, or Russian, or anything else. Right? We can talk about God with any words, but just I want to make sure that we understand, again, why we don't hyphenate, because a lot of people do that as though they are somehow trying to be more careful. Once you move away from the actual names of God, the Hebrew names of God, everything else is just an approximation. And no other language or term has, someone knows there? Okay, has any more sanctity. It's not any holier. And if you start hyphenating God, then you have to also hyphenate the Lord. And if you start hyphenating God and the Lord, you also have to hyphenate the word the merciful one. And then you also have to hyphenate the word he, because he is also talking about God. But of course, once, as one of my professors pointed out, once I do this, that G-D is pointing at God, then that becomes just as valid as G-O-D. But if it's just as valid as G-O-D, then it's also just as special. So now I have to do G-dash. But if I do G-dash, it's just like G-O-D. So now I just do dash. But if I have dash, and I know that means God, then I have to do only dash. But if I know dash means God, then I have to do dash. And if I know dash means God, then I can't do that. There is no end to trying to do this. The reason why people put hyphens in the Hebrew versions was to specifically break up the letters of the Hebrew name so that they would not be written, and therefore you wouldn't have to worry about erasing them, which is why sometimes you'll see a yud and a dash and a hey and a dash and a vav and a dash and a hey. That's a fine way of writing out what God's name looks like without writing God's name. But there's no reason to do that in English.
So we cannot write the
Yud Hey Vav Hey, or Elohim, or Adonai in Hebrew, or El Shaddai, or El. We don't write any of those words in Hebrew unless we intend what we are writing to be holy. So if you are writing a particular prayer to God, if you are writing a copy of a verse that you want to keep with you and you know you'll keep it in a holy way, then yes, you can write out as it is found in the Tanakh.
Or let's say that thank you card, and I want to say God bless you.
Then we would not use the actual names of God. We would not write, even if we were in Hebrew, we wouldn't write Yud He Vav He. Instead, we would write the He and the two dashes, or we'd write Yud and Yud, just two Yuds next to each other as a substitute. Because I don't know what the person's going to do with the thank you card, right? Maybe they'll keep it, or maybe they'll put it somewhere else, or maybe they'll forget about it and it'll end up in the trash. So I would never use God's actual name unless I knew exactly how that was going to be used thereon after. Thank you for being the doorman. And a reminder to other people, please, we want to start at 6. As I said at the beginning, I have to leave a little early because of a community event. So we got to maximize our time tonight.
Yes. The other question has to do, okay, coming from another religion, because we are here for the purpose of learning
Right.
conversion. I want to know, we know that God is Echad, is
Right.
only one.
There's only one God, right?
But I know that we're waiting in the Messiah.
Good.
What is the Messiah?
What's his job?
No. What? Who?
How do we know?
How do you know? Who are you waiting for? What are the characteristics? What is the difference? Because
Other
the
religions,
Christian is-
right?
is
Other
you.
religions say the Messiah has already shown up, right?
Jesus.
Right.
So that aspect, how can you help us know, or for us to learn what you think about the
Okay.
Messiah?
So first of all, we don't know the Messiah's name, right? So we don't have a name that we're waiting for. We have various titles that people have used, but even that is argued about. There is no name. Instead, our sages say that you'll know who the Messiah is by what they do and then what they have accomplished, right? So that you can get a candidate, a maybe Messiah, while the person is still trying. And the basic criteria is this person a righteous person? Right? Are they a good person? Are they righteous? And are they bringing people towards God? Right? Those are the first two basic categories. And by bringing people towards God, of course, we mean bringing them towards God through Torah. The Messiah has to bring the Jewish people towards God through the mitzvot, through a clearer understanding of how we should live and a more compelling call towards God. And that is the basic job of the Messiah. Now, the Messiah will, of course, also have to fight to defend the people and to defend God and to defend Torah. So there will be much of that. But we won't know who is the actual Messiah until the very end. And in fact, throughout history, we've had other candidates that came close, that they were righteous people, they were great teachers, they were bringing people close to God, they struggled on behalf of God's people, but they didn't finish the job. And according to Judaism, if you don't finish the job while you're alive, sorry, thanks for playing, you were a wonderful person, maybe you could have been the Messiah if the world had been a little different, but you weren't, and now you're dead. So what actually needs to be done before the end so that we know absolutely? Well, the biggest one is peace. Right? By the time the Messiah dies, and the Messiah will die, in his life, the Messiah is not magical, the Messiah is not an angel, the Messiah is not God, right? The Messiah will be a human being. By the time the Messiah dies, there has to be peace on earth. 100% done. Right? If somebody comes and they fight for God and they teach for God and they are great for God and they get 80% of the world following God and then they die of old age, happy in their bed, they were a wonderful person, but they weren't the Messiah.
Is that, I'd rather, that difference between a false Messiah and a failed Messiah?
Yes. so
someone who makes maybe 80% of the
right
characteristics is not necessarily called a false Messiah, but it's simply
to be a little more PC. I would say incomplete rather than failed. Right? They tried their best. They did great work, but they were not able to complete the job. But they were a candidate in the sense that they had done everything that a Messiah could do or should do, except finish the job. Whereas a false Messiah, which we've had plenty of those in Jewish history, throughout the last 2,000 years. A false Messiah is someone who claims to be the Messiah,
Right.
but isn't actually doing the job of the Messiah at all. So they're not a righteous person. They are not bringing people towards God. They are not trying to uphold Torah, right? That is a fake Messiah. That is a false Messiah. That is somebody who is lying about being the Messiah. And like I said, we've had plenty of those. Shabbatai Tzvi is the most famous.
The Roman, he killed a lot of people because he said to the Messiah.
So I don't want to get too much into Christian theology, but yes, there are numerous things about Jesus that do not fit the Jewish model, that do not fit the prophecies of the Tanakh, of the Bible. Most importantly, he died. He died, and there was still great oppression and great destruction. In fact, it happened even worse, in the years that followed. And that pretty much just disqualifies. I don't want to say too much about what that person may or may not have claimed for himself while he was alive, because we don't have any writings with his name on it that says, this is what I said. We only have what people after him wrote about him. So I don't want to give him a bad name. Other people will do that for themselves. So, but yes, the fact that he died without the world being brought to pieces, the biggest indicator that, sorry, not the Messiah.
Question, who would this person, the Messiah, is he a chosen person, or he just will come up and say, I am the Messiah?
Maybe. So this is where, when we get into the nitty-gritty details of exactly how the Messiah will become apparent in the world, there is a huge range of debate and discussion. So some people say the Messiah will be so obvious that everybody will admit it. It'll be easy to see. It'll be absolutely clear. And it'll be like, wow, it's the Messiah. Other people say, no, the Messiah will start just like a regular human being, the normal person, and he will teach and he will gather people, and it'll slowly build up momentum, and then it'll begin to spread and catch on, and more of the world will start to turn towards this person and ask them, and you'll see the world shifting, but it's not going to be a light bulb, and it's not going to be so obvious. And other people say, no, it'll be somewhere in between. And then there are other people who say the Messiah will know that he's the Messiah, and other people who say, no, the Messiah won't know he's the Messiah until he gets to the end and realizes we can do this, that we are going to succeed, that this is the beginning of the whole new phase of the world. So I don't know, but I'll be happy to find out when the Messiah comes. And I'm happy with either version, whichever way the Messiah wants to come and whichever way it's going to unfold. I'm not going to be picky.
So is it said that he's coming, as far as you know, he's coming of a 9 of Av, or he's gonna be born on a 9 of Av?
So the tradition, as perhaps literal or perhaps as a metaphor, says that he would be born on the 9th of Av, that he could come on any day, but that his birthday would be Tisha B'Av. Now, there are some people who take that literally and say, absolutely, he will be born on Tisha B'Av. If you were born on the 8th day of Av, you're disqualified. Many, and I'd say most authorities, say no, that the idea of being born on Tisha B'Av is a symbol that he will be born on the day when we are saddest, meaning that he will be born in a way that we would think we're still sad, we're still destroyed, we're still broken, but he, even out of that, will come to show us that there is a way to be better and to free the world from war and suffering. And so I think most people would agree it's probably metaphorical, and that the other 364 days are perfectly fine for his birthday too.
With David, there's some Jews, I guess they see him as the Messiah.
Okay, so let's back up a little bit. Right, so let's back up a little bit. So what does the word Messiah mean, right? Mashiach in Hebrew.
Salvation?
No.
Anointed.
Anointed. Now, how many people use the word anoint in modern English? No one. So what does anointing mean? Well, anointing means that you have been specifically appointed to a particular job, and when you are chosen to do that job, they put oil on your forehead, right? This was the sign of your inauguration, right? Nowadays, if you want to become president, you go to Washington, D.C., and there's a big party and all of that. Back then, they poured oil on your head. That was your appointment to your new post. So David was absolutely appointed to be king, and the prophet Samuel anointed him. And that made David the Mashiach, the anointed one, the person who was now scheduled to be the king. And so that is why he is called a Mashiach. But to call him the Mashiach, right, capital T, capital M, if it were English, right, doesn't work because David died, right? So David's not coming back. However, the Messiah is believed to come from the house of David. Right, so he will be a descendant of David. He will be his great grandson at some level, and that is where he will be born from, out of that family. And that's part of the idea of God having a permanent covenant with David. That is a permanent promise with David that his family will have that position. So the Mashiach is sometimes called Ben David, the son of David, but really it's not the son of David, it is the descendant of David. Unfortunately, the word Ben in Hebrew, it literally means son, but it doesn't only mean son. That is to say, Ben can also mean part of the group of. So for example, you'll see all the time Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, right? The sons of Israel. Now, there were 12 sons of Israel, but then there were also 1,000,000 sons of Israel, meaning all the Israelites. And all the Israelites were not literally Jacob's son. They were Jacob's grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-great-grandchildren and grand. Those are still Bnei Israel. Those are still children of Israel. So when we say that he is Ben David, it means some multiple generation in the future.
Ben.
Exactly. He is a descendant. He is part of the household of David. Just like when we say Bnei Israel, we mean these are people that are part of the whole nation of Israel, not direct, genetic, one right under Jacob himself. Okay, hold on a second. I want to make sure everyone gets a chance to ask some questions. Any other questions before we go back? All right, so you've got the floor.
Okay.
Everyone likes your questions.
With the name Joshua.
Joshua. Right.
I have heard it sometimes that is in when you're reading something from the Torah.
Right.
Is that because it means that's the one it means salvation, or what does
Right.
it mean?
Okay, so Yehoshua.
Because I have heard it, you said it.
Well, of course. Right. So first of all, if you're talking about the name Yehoshua, as in Joshua the son of Nun, which was Moses's right-hand guy, right, the person who took over after Moses died, that was Joshua. And Yoshua, yes, comes with the idea, the name is a compound word of the idea that God saves or God delivers. That's what the name Yehoshua means. I know that because that's my name.
No, but it's not Joshua, it's Yeshua, like the Jesus name.
Jesus?
Yeah, Yeshua. It
No.
sounds like Yeshua.
So
There is a tradition that, yes, the name Jesus derives from Yeshua, meaning God saves.
right, but the problem is perhaps is that the word Hoshea, right, is salvation, right, or to deliver, is used as a regular Hebrew word, and that is used in the prayers, and it's used, of course, in the Torah when we talk about God delivered us from the land of Egypt. So that word is used just as a regular word.
Not as a name.
No. So it's a name when it's Yehoshua. And when it's not Yehoshua, when it's not that specific form, then it's just the regular verb or noun for salvation. It's important to remember as well when we talk about salvation, it's such an English word, that salvation in Judaism is very different than salvation in Christianity. When Christians use the term save or for there to be salvation, they're talking about you are saved from sin, right? You are saved from the penalty of being a sinner, which means basically you're saved from hell. Because of your salvation, you get to go to heaven rather than going to hell. Judaism says, no, that's not what salvation means. Salvation is you were taken out of Egypt. Right? You weren't taken out of hell, you were taken out of Egypt. Now, Egypt was a living hell. Egypt was suffering. And when we talk about salvation in Judaism, we talk about the suffering that we have in this world, in this life, that we hope and we believe that when Mashiach comes, there will be an end to all of that type of suffering for everybody on earth. The next world, right, the life to come, the world to come, Olam Haba, you don't need God to get you there, right? You just need to live your life in a righteous way. You don't need any special help. I mean, it's good that God gave us the Torah so we know what we should do and we can make this life even better. But the gates of Olam Haba, the world to come, are open for anybody that's righteous. And we don't need somebody else to carry us through. God has already laid out the path for us, and all we have to do is choose to live that life.
Yeah, Olam Haba, it's over here.
No, Olam Haba, we call it the world to come. That's usually what people would call in English heaven, right? The next life, the next our spiritual life after this physical life.
Okay.
So we usually refer to that as Olam Haba.
Does that include the world of the resurrection?
Maybe, meaning the terminology, and I talked about this in an earlier video this year, but I'll do it again later when I do the next phase. But if you want to go back and get a view of the end of days, the terminology of Olam Haba is a little confusing. So some of the commentators say that because the prophecies are not 100% like, you know, poor Isaiah didn't have a timeline, right? He didn't have any diagrams. So what the commentators say is that maybe they'll have Mashiach, right? And then we will have the resurrection of the dead. That means all of us, right? The dead will get a chance to live again. And then we have Olam Haba, which is
How do you say it again?
Olam. I'll write it in English for you. Olam Haba. Right. So there's Olam Haba, which is the world to come, and Olam Hazeh, which is this world. Right. So there's this world, Olam Hazeh, and the coming world, Olam Haba. And the coming world, right, that is spiritual 100%, right? No bodies, no legs, no mouth, no eyes, right? That is, you are completely 100% just your soul, right? That's how a lot of people talk about Olam Haba. Other people say that, no, there is kind of an overlap, right? That when you die, you go to Olam Haba, and then when Mashiach comes, you will come back and be resurrected. And then when you die again, you'll go into Olam Haba again. Other people say, no, it doesn't work like that either, that there will be Mashiach and there will be resurrection, and then there will be a regular life, and then you'll die again, and then there's Olam Haba. So there's lots of different arguments. And then to make it even more confusing, some people talk about all of this as Olam Haba, even, or I guess, I'm sorry, even when it's just the regular world when people are alive. Because remember, when Mashiach comes and all this happens, there's still going to be rain, there's still going to be sun, there's still going to be plants, there's still going to be dogs and birds and cats and all of the normal stuff, and people will still eat and they will still go to the bathroom. It'll be a normal world until we finally pass and move on to Olam Haba. But some people talk about Olam Haba to mean the world, this world, when it's perfected. So it gets confusing when people talk about it. So that's why I prefer to call Olam Haba just meaning the full spiritual existence.
Heaven.
Well, yes. But again, heaven is a very English word that has lots of meanings of, you know, streets of gold and big white floaty cities and clouds and harps and angels and right, all the stuff they paint on the ceilings and in famous places of Europe. So yeah, but Olam Haba is the better term.
Okay. So now, what is the position of the Jewish word with reincarnation? I don't believe it.
Okay.
But from Ash Latino,
Yeah.
it's from
Latino.
yeah, it's from Jews. They were talking about reincarnation.
Okay.
You have like a second chance, and I said, What's the chance I have it now? And then that's it.
Okay, so welcome to the diversity of Jewish opinion. So, you know how people talk about, like, well, there are some scientists who say that global warming isn't really man-made. But when they say that, they mean there are 2 scientists who say no, and then there are a million scientists who say yes. Reincarnation is the same, meaning 99% of all Jews who are alive or who have ever lived, and 99% of all Jewish scholars, all of the great sages and writers of Jewish history, 99% of them say there is no such thing as reincarnation. Right? And if you look through the writings, you don't hear anybody talk about it until the late Middle Ages. Right? Not coincidentally, at around the same time that you are beginning to get more contact with the trade routes that go all the way to India and the Far East. Right? The ideas of reincarnation are most likely, we don't have, a smoking gun, but most likely were imported from the Far East, along with spices and cinnamon and pepper and silk and other. They also brought ideas when they were traveling. And so reincarnation sort of introduced. So yes, there are some Jewish people, most famously in the Hasidic group, which pick this up with this idea of reincarnation. But you are absolutely right that the vast majority of Jews and Jewish scholars say that it is the opposite of everything else that Judaism teaches, which is you have one life, you have your responsibility for living your life. If you do something right, you will be rewarded. If you do something wrong, you will be punished. Not if you do something right, the next person will be rewarded. Or if you do something wrong, the next person will be punished with no knowledge of what's happened. Numerous places in the Talmud talk about the body and the soul being one unit and one distinct unit that will be rewarded or punished as they are, not passing it down to the next, body for it to get another chance or anything. Reincarnation is tempting for some people because it helps them explain, why did that baby die? And I have heard and read this actual explanation in some of these works where they'll say the baby died because it was evil in the previous life, right? And so it needed to die twice. It died the first time as the really bad person, and then it got born again and died a second time, so that way you could really punish that person. This is crazy. Sorry, I mean, I'll try to be a little fair. This does not have any strong proof within Judaism as a belief that this is what God has told us. You are responsible. The soul that sins, it will be punished, not down the chain. And we believe that ultimate reward and punishment happen in Olam Haba, not in the replay of a life. So if somebody dies and they have not done tshuva, they have not repented, they have not gotten rid of all of their transgressions, there will be punishment in Olam Haba. It will not be permanent. It's not fire. It's not people with horns and stabby things. Right? There will be punishment as the soul comes to grips with what it did. And so too, if you have done righteousness, then you will find that existence will be an amazing blessing beyond description. That awaits there. It does not await a replay cycle and all of that. So no, Judaism, I can tell you, does not believe in reincarnation. Some Jews believe in reincarnation, but not everything a Jew believes is Judaism.
How many is Jewish a religion?
Yes. So this.
When you sign a paper, usually they ask you, "What are you? If you're Christian."
Right.
It never shows the word Jewish in it.
Well, Judaism is usually the word. So if you're looking like at a form, or if there's like a drop-down menu on a website, if it asks you what's your religion, you would write Judaism. Right. So now the thing that makes it a little bit more complicated is Judaism is a religion and ... It is also more, because most modern American religions are very much about you, just you, all by yourself, right? If I'm Catholic, my wife's Protestant, my brother's Buddhist, right? And I go to my church, he goes to his temple, and we're each in our own little bubble. That's not what Judaism is. Judaism says, no, you have your relationship with God, absolutely, and you have your relationship with all these other people. And that relationship comes with a whole package of other things. It comes with certain types of music. It comes with certain types of food. It comes with a long history and a long heritage. It comes with traditions and customs. It comes with a whole language we call Hebrew. It's a package of a culture, a civilization, as Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan put it, that goes beyond what most Americans mean when they say religion. And so that creates a much bigger network of identity than just how do I pray. Now, historically, that was what all religions used to be like. But after the Enlightenment, they all decided to stop talking about identity and just you go to your church, I go to my church, and we don't have to shoot each other anymore. That was their big solution. Judaism would like people to have very complicated identities and also not shoot each other. But the rest of Europe has to catch up to that.
And the Babel building.
The Tower of Babel,
The
yes.
tower, yeah. I have only one idiom.
Mm-hmm.
What's the idiom?
Well, which language did they
First
speak?
language.
Okay, what was the first language? So we don't know 100%, but most of our commentator and sages say that it would have been Hebrew, right? That Hebrew was the language that God had chosen originally because it is the best way for God to express the truth that we have, meaning the Torah. And therefore, of course, that would have been the starting language that God would have used. But unfortunately, the people were unwilling to cooperate. Tower of Babel is a very good follow-up question because what was the problem there? The problem wasn't that God mixed up their languages. The problem was that the people refused to listen to each other's mixed up languages. Right? If you speak, Swahili and you speak, Turkish, there's no reason you have to fight. There's no reason you have to move away from each other, right? You learn a little Turkish, you learn a little Swahili, and it's fine, right? And you work it out. There's no reason why this would be a problem, unless your attitude tells you, I want to be just like everyone else around me, and everyone else has to be like me. And indeed, that is exactly the idea that the builders of the Tower of Babel had. And that was what God was angry at, was that these people were forcing everyone to be exactly the same, to be one nation, one people with no differences, no variety within their community, nothing. They all had to be the same, work on the same project, accomplish, and God's like, that's not what humans are supposed to be, right? Humans are supposed to be diverse. He didn't tell them to scatter. He just told them, you can't force each other to all be the same. More questions?
How long would it take to learn how to speak in Hebrew?
How long does it take to learn to speak Hebrew? Some people can learn Hebrew in 3 months. Well, so in Israel, they'll often do a program called Ulpan. And Ulpan is you move to Israel, you want to become a citizen, and they give you like 3 months of 10 hours a day learning Hebrew. And they just push it into your brain. And some people are very good at languages, and they come out and they can speak pretty well, right? I mean, they're not going to be giving a major speech, but they can handle most regular conversations. And then they have to learn more vocabulary for their jobs and things like that. If you study, a little bit each day and you really work at it and you find a Hebrew speaker to practice with, then you can, slowly begin to build fluency over the course of a year, 2 years, 3 years. If you just want to learn Hebrew for reading, you can do it even faster, right? Because being able to speak means you can form all the words in your head and you can put them out in a basic, correct form. Reading, all the words are there for you, and all you have to do is decode them and be able to understand what they mean. That is a much quicker process, but that doesn't lead to conversation. So if you just want to learn how to read and understand like the Siddur and the Torah, that is not that hard because there aren't that many words in the prayer book. There aren't that many words in the Torah. A lot of words repeat, like God. It's the most common word in the Torah that isn't, one of the prepositions and things. So that kind of learning is a lot easier to accomplish. But it does take daily practice, and it does take a dedication. You have to really work at it for it to happen.
The alphabet is very important.
Well, of course, the alphabet is important, but let me give you an example. I've worked now in three different cities mostly. in San Diego and Baltimore, and here now in the greater Orlando area. And I've worked with religious school students in that entire period. I was a religious school student, of course, when I was a little boy too. I have seen religious school kids who went every week to religious school, and by the time they were in seventh grade, they still didn't really know all of the letters of the alphabet. Right? They still didn't really know all of them. I have seen other kids that they have learned the alphabet in 1 month, right? Because they sit down, they practice, their parents work with them, and they learn it. Right? Because it's just an alphabet. There's what, 22 letters plus the final forms and some vowels, right? Pooh, you can learn 22 facts like that. Right? Think about how many people know everybody who played on the Yankees in 1989. Right? They could tell you the entire Yankee lineup. The learning the letters is not that hard if you practice a little bit every day, over and over and over. Languages are a very intense study activity. You have to really focus and just learn them and don't lose them.
Were you born speaking Hebrew,
Me?
English, or how did you learn your Hebrew?
So I learned Hebrew twice. So I grew up just speaking English, but my religious school taught us Hebrew just for decoding. So we learned this is an aleph, this is a bet, and this is how you say Abba. And we learned a few words. Abba means dad, and Torah means the Torah, and things like that. But most of what we learned, we had no idea what we were saying. And it was just mechanical, right? Just mechanical. When I was older in college was when I decided I wanted to actually learn Hebrew. And then I began learning on my own, and it was going slowly until I took an Ulpan course where I studied intensively, and that helped me get up to speed with it as a language. But even still, learning or using Hebrew as a conversation, it's you get rusty when you don't practice it. So I learned Hebrew in 2 different phases in my life, and I learned it the right way the second time. But the problem is with most kids, we don't give the school enough time to teach them Hebrew as a language. I mean, imagine if you wanted to learn French. Does anybody here speak French? Okay, imagine if you wanted to learn.
For many years, can't barely hear.
Okay, imagine you wanted to learn Japanese, right? Nobody here speaks Japanese, right? So if I said, okay, you can learn Japanese, but you only get 1 hour of practice with a teacher, and you can't practice any other time during the week, right? 1 day a week, 1 hour, and then the rest of the other 6 days, you don't get to practice. How long do you think it would take you to learn Japanese? Forever. You would never really learn it as a language. You would maybe be able to identify some of the things. You'd know a few of the words. You'd do what I did when I was a kid with Hebrew, because we don't give our schools enough time to teach our kids, because the kids also have regular school, and they have homework, and they have soccer, and they have band practice, and they have, piano practice, and then they have the Boy Scouts and girls. We don't give them enough time to learn all the things we really want them to learn. So,
Still have time?
A couple minutes.
Can I ask a question about fasting?
Yes.
Okay.
Very important since Yom Kippur is coming up.
Okay. Fasting. We do fasting different. I want to see how we're doing it here.
So fasting let's use Yom Kippur as the example, right? So for Yom Kippur, the day before Yom Kippur, you eat, normally, and you can even eat a little extra if it helps you, right? Yom Kippur evening happens, right? The same time that you'd be lighting candles, the fast begins. Now, in Judaism, a fast mainly means you don't eat and you don't drink. I should point out as well, I always want to remind people, if your doctor tells you it's unhealthy, then of course you eat, right? If the doctor tells you you can not eat, but you have to drink, then you don't eat and you drink. You follow your doctor's advice. And it's important that you follow your doctor's advice, not your own opinion. Even if you say, well, my doctor said I have to eat, but I'm tough, I can do it, or I'm so holy, I'm going to still not eat. And right? As the Torah says, these are the commandments to live by them. Live by them, not die by them, right? So medical advice always comes first, even over your own opinion. So let's imagine you're in good health, normal person, no issues. You don't eat, you don't drink. And you don't do that all the way until the following night, when we would do Havdalah, which is like the 3 stars come out in the sky. So it's about 25 hours total on Yom Kippur that we don't eat. Now, when we talk about fasting on Yom Kippur, we also mean you don't wear leather shoes. We also mean that you don't bathe yourself in anything. You can wash your hands if they're dirty or something, or if you use the bathroom. And it also means that we don't anoint ourselves. So we're not perfumes and all the fancy lotions and stuff. And we don't have sex, right? So those are the other things we also fast on Yom Kippur from doing. Is there another specific?
So you don't do anything. You can stay at home and.
Well, for Yom Kippur, it's a holiday, so you'd be coming to services, and we'd be doing the whole service. Yom Kippur is a very intense here at the synagogue. Yes,
Okay.
on Tisha B'av, which we just had last weekend, Tisha B'av is different because Tisha B'av is a sad holiday. Yom Kippur is a happy one, focused but happy. And also on Tisha B'av, we can go to work. So if you had to, and you were a farmer and you needed to go out and take care of the work, you would. On Yom Kippur, it's just like Shabbat. You don't do work. So you go to services instead.
Okay, but I'm saying, prayers, you don't have to get involved in prayers or anything like that?
We do the regular prayers that we would do. Now, Yom Kippur, like I said, it's a lot more prayers than usual. But on some of the other minor fast days, which I talked about, I think 2 weeks ago on the YouTube, there are some small changes to what we do in our regular daily prayers. Remember, there's 3 prayers, 3 services we do privately or with a group each day. In Orlando, it's hard to find a group, so usually it's just privately. And we do those in the morning, the afternoon, and the evening. And there are some small changes that we'll do for those other minor fast days. Yom Kippur, everything changes. And there's even a whole special book that we use.
Use the phone to watch TV, can go out?
So Yom Kippur, we treat just like Shabbat, right? So it's just like a full sacred holy day.
Okay.
Tisha B'Av and the other minor fast days are regular work days. Depressing, but they're regular days. So you can still do other things.
Since we were talking about food,
Yes,
and it's very important the kosher food.
of course.
And it's because we had to care for this body that is God gave us this body, right?
So keeping kosher is not about being healthy, but keeping kosher, of course, is a good way to help you stay healthy. Right? Keeping kosher is first about making a distinction between what I eat and what I don't eat, based on what God taught me in the Torah. That God has said, these things you can eat, these things you can't. And following that division is the main reason for keeping kashrut. It's part of the discipline, and it's part of our dedication to God. It, of course, is also healthy, but you can also eat unhealthy kosher food, right? There's kosher ice cream, and if you eat 5 gallons of kosher ice cream, you're still going to be sick.
Yeah, no, because I was noticing that, okay, it's important that we care of this body that He
Yes.
gave us.
That is true.
And from where I come, it was saying that it's you treat it like a temple too, in a case
Right.
like it's I don't know, it's a gift from God.
Well, of course, yes.
So-
And we should take care of our body to the best of our ability.
But then I also see that the kosher is more for the meats and some preparation, but not for sweets. Because we eat a lot of sweets.
Oh, yes.
And that maybe
Well,
has some like ingredients too.
Well, so there's lots of debate about what is the healthiest diet, right? Many people will argue about what nutrition is or least important. And kosher doesn't tell us about nutrition. It just tells us about what is accepted or not accepted. But what the advice I usually give to people is on Shabbat, or if it's a chag like Passover, Sukkot, or Shavuot, then don't worry about the calories. But from Sunday through Friday, then be more careful what you eat, right? Allow yourself to have your sweet and to have your fun stuff on Shabbat or a festival, and that will make that day seem special. And during the rest of the week, eat kale. Right, during the rest of the week, eat whatever you think is healthy for the middle of the week, and that way you still have your health, but you also have many of the pleasures of this world. And there's nothing wrong with pleasures that come through the tongue, as long as we do them in the right measure, as long as we don't go overboard. All right, we're going to have to call it there because I've got to drive across town.
All right.
You didn't mention anything about the